Professor here at Cal Maritime, and I am the moderator for session 4. We've already had one speaker before lunch, and we have 3 very excellent speakers after lunch. And I have the privilege of introducing the first speaker now, Dr. Stephen Price, who will address us on preparing for e-navigation, changing the teaching paradigm.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Quite an introduction. I'm a nutty professor from the United Kingdom, which, as you all know, is near London, Scotland. It's a great privilege to speak to so many distinguished people who are each outstanding in their field. And the thing I most want to talk to you about is how human beings are going to start having to think about a changed operational paradigm. Why am I here? Well, I spent 11 years in the United Kingdom's Royal Naval Reserve, specializing as a navigator in mine countermeasures. And that gave me an early insight into precise navigation and electronic navigation. That also found me dealing with pilotage, visual and blind, and many, many hours spent bridge watchkeeping. Some of that time, eventually, I spent as a squadron navigator, and much to my surprise, the telephone used to go quite often. That interest carried me into a PhD program at Liverpool John Moores University, and it was at that time that particular school was very active in radar, ARPA, and electronic navigation research. And in the course of that, I wrote software that formed a prototype electronic chart. Some of that time as a research assistant was also spent teaching undergraduate students how to do computer programming. And this was in the days of the 8086 processor, and some of that programming was actually assembly language. And so we were talking pretty much to the metal, talking to the chips, talking assembly language, building concepts, building models, working in Microsoft C, and eventually writing 40,000 lines or thereabouts of code that produced a working electronic chart. We then took that, put it in the simulator, and gave it to pilots to play with. Interesting. Why do I continue to be interested? Because I think that a disruptive technology like e-navigation requires a disruptive discourse. We need to speak frankly about it. We also need to see through the smoke and work out what's important and what is fanciful. The way that I've found best to do that is through social networking on the internet, and found myself a contributor to the Nautical Institute LinkedIn group, and we've had many interesting discussions on there about philosophy of navigation, collision avoidance, whether or not training standards actually hit the mark. And partly as a consequence of my remarks, David invited me to attend the IMO STW44 last year, where I was able to see at first hand how the IMO process generates the rules that we have to live by. So the Nautical Institute and its LinkedIn discussion group have become quite an important part of my life. And I'm very grateful for its existence, and it's a dialogue that is indispensable for bringing this technology forward. I suppose the final thing that I'd like to draw your attention to is the fact that I publish, we publish, and we need to keep going. So when we talk about a maritime education and training objective, what we want to do is produce people who can do their jobs in a robust, a critical, and a competent way. And I'd like you to think about that as ruggedization. A ruggedized seafarer, perhaps even a standardized seafarer, and obviously a harmonized seafarer who can actually use the technology to best advantage. Here's the heritage issue that we have grown to know and love. Traditional navigation, as you might find it in a traditional wheelhouse or a traditional ship's bridge. We have relatively fragile systems, for example, Loran, the sextant, the magnetic compass. And we have to generate data using fragile systems in order to compile a picture for ourselves. It's a very egocentric job in a traditional, I can see Captain Grubb smiling there. You're drawing information from the environment, and when you've got it together in a picture you're starting to believe in, you spend your life then managing the errors. And that is, as it were, the seamanship side of navigation that we need to try and hang on to. What's interesting there is that once we get to the error management stage, we're a self-informed skeptic of what we see in front of us. Over in this brave new world of e-navigation, we have robust systems. And we've had a discussion about GPS. Well, it's robust. It's pretty robust. And it's being added to as a GNSS all the time so that we can land airliners in fog. That PNT that we like to talk about is becoming tougher and tougher and tougher. That said, it's not perfect. The data that we deal with is becoming increasingly reliable. We now have ENCs. They're all on GPS-compatible datums. They're looked at through quality management systems. And these ideas then allow us to pre-compile a picture that we can present in front of a navigator. The trick here is how do we become an informed e-skeptic? Well, in our traditional training paradigm, we're working from the bottom up. It's a bare bench. You throw them a chart, dividers, pencil, rubber, a magnetic compass, and they have to start making data for themselves. In e-navigation, we've got our pre-compiled picture, and it's the navigator's job to drill down through that data and find out if it's worth anything to him. Putting it to the test, I like to believe that the only place that you can really get any measure of navigational competence is at sea, in, as it were, a finalization sense, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Psycho-emotionally, doing this navigation at sea is very different to the psychology and emotion that you get in simulators. And certainly when we're talking about issuing master's tickets or command tickets, I like to believe that a spell at sea is a great way of doing the test. So here we are in Sweden. It's late autumn 2013. I'm observing a Master 200 course. I wrote this up for Seaways, by the way, if you want to take a look at that. And we're dealing with a hawsepipe group of students coming from a variety of different flag states. This is the terrain, and we do a lot of night pilotage around the rocks, and we use predominantly visual techniques, a lot of radar, and we actually switch on ECDIS very late on in the course. So we're getting these practical muscle memory skills going in terms of looking out the window, looking at the radar, looking behind you, because some of the leading lights are behind you, and getting these kids either to work solo or as a team, and seeing how much control they can start exerting over the exercise, either as a team member or in the chair. Okay, so here's the office. Bottom up, you'll see that it's got a good old-fashioned wooden wheel there, conventional levers. To the left, you've got a paper chart table, there's a magnetic compass, and there's a pencil sharpener. Once we're starting the top-down phase, where we're starting to have to do some teamwork, looking at ARPA, which you can see our hirsute friend there in front of the ARPA. There's another radar forward, and then there's an ECDIS there too. But this is where they're having to start tackling bigger ideas. And they're still having to control the errors, and they're still having to control instructor-induced issues. So what comes out? Well, the thing that we find is that getting these guys spatially aware is really important. Sometimes they get buried in what they're doing. They're not controlling what's going on outside the ship. We have to work with them on the application of the Colregs. We have to make them prioritize the tasks that they're doing. Sometimes it's a case of saying, stop doing that, do this. Otherwise, I'll stop the ship. Cognitive reasoning, getting them to do mental arithmetic in their head rather than on the calculator. You're doing 10 knots. How far are you going to travel in 6 minutes? Think. Whole ship awareness and ship handling. Well, that's an interesting one, because we make them cook their own food. So as we rotate the team, there's one guy doing domestics, one guy doing an engine room, and it means that we can thin out the bridge and keep people occupied. But if you're going to smash the crockery, let the galley know. And then, because it's quite intense, they have to work out how they're going to handle their workload. Are they going to get their head down? Are they going to mess around with the next pilotage? How are they going to manage their time? And how are they going to deal with each other? So it's a pretty full-on test. What this e-navigation does mean, though, is that the task has changed. So we're now talking about an environment where we have to look at task analysis seriously. There's a lot of information available on the bridge. The way in which you handle the watchkeeping is different. And it's important, certainly in my view, that we start getting people familiar with the bridge environment, learning what information they can extract from it early, particularly when we're doing coal rigs and things like that. And the next bit is really interesting because what I think is important is licensing officers by practical assessment of solar watchkeeping skills. An oral and a written paper isn't enough to provide an insurable guarantee of competence. Well, because I like talking and because I like writing, we ended up with an idea that came forward called C-Drive. And C-Drive was something that I got Cal Maritime involved in, Nigel got involved in, and we wrote about what we felt would be a good idea to start thinking about a competence-based training model and a best practice model that we could offer to the world. And it seemed natural that with the facilities that Cal Maritime have here, the proximity to Silicon Valley that Cal Maritime have here, the outward-looking and liberal ethos that Cal Maritime have here, the experience that is had here, that this would be a great place to develop that model. So taking that another step further, I shared that with the other guys in the Nautical Institute LinkedIn, and they thought it was a brilliant idea. And my discussion about watchkeeping competence went just over 1,000 comments a couple of months ago, and it's still going. Well, being a bit of a techie, I knocked up a website, just a prototype, you know, a straw man. But this was to give an idea of what kind of portal could be made available to other people to start accessing the resources that we were going to create. And that is just knocked up on a free drag and drop website that's based locally at Wix. If anybody's interested, I'll show you this website live because we'll just hook up to it, and I'll show you what I've put in the library. The other fields are really blank. I've waited until this moment to work out whether it's worth pulling the trigger on a social view of watchkeeper competence that everybody can buy into. So if you're interested, come and talk to me, and I'll show you, and we'll talk some more. So, any questions of me at this point? Good. Because I'm on holiday from now on. Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. This is Steve's vacation photos. The reason they're vacation photos is because I'm here on my own money. And this is where I get to share the passion with you. E-navigation, what could possibly go wrong? People got this catch-up, didn't they? Does salt water and electricity mix? Well, that's a question we've got to ask ourselves. what about disruptive technology? Are people going to use the technology in the way it was meant to be used? What has been the best holiday photo I've taken so far? That one, last night. That's when we got to thank the people that had worked so hard for us, and it was really good to see the rewards being given back to the team.